Okay, this is a follow-up of my last video about Grand Theft Auto characters, and this week we're looking at Arthur Morgan from Red Dead Redemption 2. What are we looking at? Red Dead Redemption 2 came out in October 2018. It was created by Rockstar, whose previous full-release game was GTA 5 in 2013. RDR2 is their only game created for the 8th generation consoles, PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. It shows off Rockstar's most recent version of their Rage engine, and all assets are authored in PBR. One note, considered to be one of the most expensive video games to develop, estimates place the game's combined development and marketing budget between 370 and 540 million US dollars. Okay, with that out of the way, let's have a look at the model. So here we've got Arthur Morgan, and I've just loaded Michael from Grand Theft Auto 5 just to give a quick comparison. What we're looking at here is polygon distribution. You'll notice they're kind of similar, which is quite surprising, especially considering the generational leap between these two assets. Let's have a look at their faces. Michael weighs in at 7,886 and Arthur's face at 9,168, a marginal difference. If we just zoom in here and look at the quad size, you notice again that they're quite similar, which is pretty surprising. It's quite easy though to tell what's going on with Arthur. There's many more objects on him. Looks like the base pose has changed a little bit with the elbow bent slightly. I wonder if this is simply just to make the model a little more pleasing to look at a neutral pose. Who knows? Like Grand Theft Auto 5, Arthur can change outfits. So here's an example with his hat. What you're seeing is here, he's got a full head of hair, and then there's a no hair state, just with his head, and then you have a duplicate of his hair geometry that is designed to work against the hat that he then uses. So you can see it just toggled here. These are the kind of states that you would have if you went from not wearing a hat to wearing a hat. And so they do a lot of this mesh duplication in the game. So a lot of art assets are then having to be made to then accommodate the two. We've got another example here with a shirt. So this particular configuration, you can see that a lot of this upper body mesh geometry is actually removed, and you just see the shirt work over the top. And you know that because this texture map exists, and only a small portion of the exposed body parts are used, and everything else is it only exists on the texture map there. To touch on unwrapping for a second, I've seen this style of unwrapping in a few places. It's not commonly taught, but when I saw it, it was something that I very much used on games I've worked on. This warrants its own video, but you'll see in the head, the body, the pants, they're all unwrapped in this similar style. And then you see this, which is a kind of looser method of unwrapping. And I wonder if this is done because these particular assets just are not standardized. So you have this very proper form of unwrapping, which is probably standardized for a lot of the base characters and everything like that. And then you have these bespoke assets that are then, they don't conform to any kind of unwrapping method. They're really just put asset on UV space. I found something pretty interesting here with how the hair texture is set up. I just wanted to go on this briefly and mentioned, it's safe to assume that Rockstar have their own internal tech for how they use hair. I've noticed that they don't use any anisotropic highlighting, but I'm sure they use something to manipulate subsurface values and specular values in engine. These aren't obvious looking at the assets like we are. I'm really just talking about the textures and how they use them. So here we've got the base hair texture, and as I was loading it, I noticed the red and blue channels are actually masks. So they identified different strands in these two channels here. And the alpha obviously stores the transparency. This particular texture that we're looking at weighs in at 2048 by 1024, so a non-square texture. And we've got a normal map, which represents the hair and all of its normal map detail, which is again 2K by 1K. And then we have a base color map. The base color map is 256 pixels and entirely flat. It could almost like just be a single color. It's just a flat brown texture. And then another normal map at 32 by 32 pixels, which is odd. I'm unsure why this is used. I'm not sure what's going on there, because the MIP mapping for the normal map, the here normal map, should be a good enough substitute for the full resolution one. So I don't know why they would have this flat normal map. What's cool about it is you use these off-resolution textures because here at this like scale does not require a 2K by 1K base color map. You can get away with, you know, a single pixel of brown if you wanted. So it's cool that they show these off-scale textures and use them in game. So I just wanted to draw some attention to that. A little more on textures is it's interesting how they go about packing textures. All assets have an albedo, a normal, and middle rough spec whenever that applies. Let's just have a look at Arthur's head texture maps and see if we can identify obvious texture maps from them. So head AB is obviously the albedo map, and then we've got a blood mask. I've never seen anything like that before. My speculation is that based on certain actions in the game, you can actually have blood flush into the face. So one example would be if you go into cold weather, blood actually starts going towards your cheeks and certain areas. You get a very different look of a person's face in different climates. And so I believe the blood mask is the way you would go about changing this. MA1 looks like AO, or ambient occlusion, in the red channel, roughness and then subsurface in the blue channel. All the alpha maps are just white, so there's no information there. MB1 is quite odd, and I'm unsure what MB1 dictates. I'm just going to take a stab in the dark. I think it looks like specular and then a wetness mask, but I'm not sure. And then we have a normal map, a wrinkle map, and a wrinkle mask map. These wrinkle maps look like they're used on every character, which is really cool to standardize that for all characters used. This is a little different to the last video because we've got a rig to look at. So let's move on to that. So this asset happens to have joints and skin information on it, and you can really see how complex these characters can be. This is where all the magic happens, guys. Just to be up front, I've never worked on or seen anything like this before. It's a real pleasure to go through. Let me just go ahead and say there are a few things about this that you may not realize. So this particular rig that we're looking at, it's safe to assume, is a higher fidelity than your regular NPC. In Red Dead Redemption and Grand Theft Auto, rigs need to accommodate things such as level of detail. They do that by turning on and off joints where needed. What I've noticed in recent years is that character rigs, they typically used to only drive character movement, and they've shifted away from this to actually giving character telemetry based on what they're doing in the environment. And this can actually drive game logic. So the rigs are actually doing a lot of the heavy lifting with how this character works in the video game. In addition, many of these joints are not actually influencing mesh vertices. You can think of them as helper joints. They really just hold their position in space relative to another joint. These are always good because you'll have a scenario where you need to bring, for example, the hat to the character's head, and what you would do is place a joint to that position where the hat would sit, and then anchor the you would simply just parent the hat to that joint. instead of having to guess the location in space, you would fix a joint there. Again, it doesn't have any skin weight information, it just holds that position relative to the head. Another thing that I've seen in the industry, and this brings me to the first Last of Us game, Naughty Dog went completely ham on adding joints. And what they did is, the reason for it is they wanted to control closed volume so that in certain cutscenes, if you had some unpleasing shape, you could actually just go through and keyframe, shirt volume away to have it less distracting, that kind of thing. This is not the case with Arthur. There are joints that control for volume loss, but it's not done in that way. I think this is more of like a muscle volume type thing, so it's a little different to that Last of Us example. The main distinction here is that The Last of Us is very much for that kind of game where cinematics and stuff are really just baked out, and it's very linear. It doesn't really accommodate for different clothing styles or a dynamic camera, different camera shots or whatever. Just going through the joints on Arthur, it looks like there are 1,625 of them, which is a very high number. But if I go through and filter my search to this scale, it goes right down to 88 joints. So I think this is actually a much more reasonable number. I think, around that 100 mark is probably what was used to dictate a lot of his body mechanical movements in game. If we go ahead and have a look at the facial rig, I think this is where the money is. There are 317 joints that describe everything going on here. It's really cool to see. I'd love to just go through all of this mess in the face. It's if I was a rigger in a game studio, I would be geeking out like crazy on this. Why it's so cool to see is because some games would typically just use a blend shape, which is sort of a character's face geometry baked out and moved in a different kind of way. This is different because they're actually using joints to drive different portions of the face. I've always thought Rockstar's facial animations were some of the best in the industry, and I believe it looks so good because of this rigging technique. I've ranted in the past about how I believe blend shapes, they come across as very artificial because they simply just go from one pose to another in a linear fashion, which makes it very uncanny. But having your facial features driven by joints, where that could be translated or rotated anywhere based on an animator's judgment, would give way more options and nuances. This option here, it might be a little more tedious to animate, but the actual outcome and possibilities of what it can be would be much more. It's fair to say that Rockstar also uses motion capture and stuff like this, so these rigs I'm sure would accommodate facial performances as well as like full body mocap performances. As I start to wrap up, the hands. Let's just have a look at the hands quickly. One thing that Rockstar standardized on the re-releases of Grand Theft Auto 5 was the ability to go into first-person mode, and it was really cool to see that Red Dead Redemption 2 used that standardization, and you can see Arthur's hands are have that bump in resolution. Fingernails are all duplicate textures, but yeah, it's still very cool to see the way this is done. And the knee and elbow joints, very, very similar to what we saw on the Grand Theft Auto 5 character video. The joints, they don't go crazy here. The geometry is slightly higher than what it was before, but still very much in line with that resolution that was defined, in the Generation 7 consoles, in Grand Theft Auto 5 and 4. All right, so in closing, at this point in time, I've only really looked through the Rockstar characters in any detail. I've only happened to catch other characters like the Naughty Dog characters in various GDC talks. and whatever happens to be posted on YouTube. But there is this push in the background of the game industry to simply just do what the film industry is doing, because modern game engines can do that. But I believe this is the wrong way to go about doing it. The two mediums are very different, and performance is such a problem in video games. So Rockstar really are the people to watch in this space, in my opinion. They are the leaders in the industry for a reason. It was a pleasure to go through this model, and I hope those of you watching got something out of this. Cheers.